Well, you saw his response to the Chequers plan mentioned there. Jacob Rees Mogg is the chairman of the European Research Group of Conservative MPs, and he's in Somerset. Thank you for joining us this morning. The Prime Minister
Good morning.
The Prime Minister, in an interview this morning, made very clear she thinks that the plan set out at Chequers does respect all of the red lines she had laid down before. Can you agree with her on that much?
No, I don't. I think that the European Court of Justice will have a role that is effectively the same as it has now over the Common Rule Book, which isn't a Common Rule Book, but the European Union's Rule Book, judged by the European Court of Justice. And if we don't follow it, we risk being penalised, which is the same position as we're in today. Parliament, even now, could pass an act to say we weren't following a particular European Union rule. So, no, I don't think her red lines have been respected. And some of what she said was very interesting. Andrew Marr pushed her on when this decision about the Common Rule Book was made, when they decided to have the EU's rules for the UK. And it seems it came into discussion a long time ago, but David Davis in the DExEU department wasn't told. And that's a very strange way to be running government.
Yes, we've heard from Steve Baker, who resigned from that department as well. He's been saying this morning that, in fact, the department is a Potemkin-like structure and that they were kept in the dark. Well, we'll be talking to a minister from that department later, so we can put all of that to him. What I want to ask you is, the Prime Minister said the plan had changed a bit because what was originally proposed was non-negotiable. It had been made clear in Brussels they wouldn't accept it. So this is the only realistic alternative, isn't it?
This seems to me a hopeless way to negotiate, that you accept what the other side says at an early stage of the negotiations as holy writ. And we've done that the whole way through. The staging of negotiations was a mistake. We should never have agreed to that. In a negotiation, two sides say what they want. You don't just as one side say, oh, well, the EU said this, we must follow it. And I think Julia Hartley-Brewer, in her comment earlier, got absolutely to the heart of this, and it came out at a briefing to MPs as well. The government, unfortunately, believes that Brexit is not a good thing in itself. It seems to think it has to be tempered with non-Brexit. And that was when the Prime Minister said people voted with their hearts, and she was doing something with her head. In my view, and in the view of most Brexiteers, head and heart come together. Brexit is enormously positive, a huge opportunity for the country, and I'm afraid the Prime Minister doesn't see that, and it's why I think she is a Remainer who has remained a Remainer.
And in that case, is it time to change the Prime Minister? You said in the past that you want to change the policy, but not the PM. From what you're saying today, a Remainer who's remained a Remainer, it doesn't sound like you will ever get a policy you can agree with while she's still at the top.
I think she still has the opportunity to change her policy. To go back to the Mansion House speech, which had considerable elements of compromise in it, the Mansion House speech was welcomed from memory both by Nicky Morgan and by me, so it had wide support across the Conservative Party. It was a good basis to do things on the assumption of equivalence of regulations, not of process of regulations. It's the process of regulations, the EU's rule book, that makes us the vassal state. And that's the error that clearly has been discussed in Downing Street for some time, hidden away in the back rooms, away from DExEU and away from members of Parliament and away from the British public. But if the Prime Minister went back to what she said before, then there's a policy that people could rally around.
There is nothing she said this morning that suggests she is prepared to go back to what she said before. In fact, she said it wasn't practical because it was non-negotiable. If she is not going to change her mind, and she's going to stick with this policy, does there come a point at which you have to contemplate trying to replace the PM rather than just replace the policy?
I think we can focus on the policy, which will have to be brought through Parliament, and the Prime Minister will have a choice then. She'll have to decide either to change the policy or get it through on the back of Labour Party votes. And that would be a very divisive thing for a leader of the Conservative Party to do. I'm sure Theresa May does not want to split the Conservative Party, and therefore she will find that the inevitable consequence of the parliamentary arithmetic is that she will need to change it to keep the party united.
But you say that she has broken trust, so why would you believe her if she were to make some changes to this plan?
Because they'll come through in legislation, and legislation is a clear statement of fact rather than waffly promises. It is a worry, you're quite right, that the Prime Minister was so clear that Brexit meant Brexit and she had her red lines, and these have now gone, and trust is to some extent at the heart of policy making, so that does concern me.
So there is legislation coming before the House of Commons this week. The customs bill will be there tomorrow. Are you prepared to vote against elements of that? And how many of your Conservative colleagues do you think will rebel?
Well, I think the bills themselves are sensible bills overall and are a necessary part of preparation for no deal in the event that that was what was to happen. But I've put down some amendments and we'll see what support they get on Monday.
What support are you anticipating? You must have been speaking to your colleagues about what kind of number are likely to support your amendment.
Well, we'll have a meeting on Monday and we'll know then more clearly what the numbers will be. I wouldn't like to make a forecast on the numbers this morning.
Is there a possibility you could vote against the third reading?
I think that's highly unlikely because the bill tomorrow will allow for customs collection and duties and so on. There may be fallback positions if that bill weren't passed, but it's quite useful in terms of leaving on WTO terms. And the bill on Tuesday, the trade bill, allows us to roll over the trade deals with the EU's already done with third countries. And that would be an unwise thing to vote down. So I'm not expecting the third reading to be voted down.
But you're going to have to give a show of strength, because if you want to persuade the Prime Minister to change her policy, and this morning she doesn't sound as though she is minded to do that, you're going to have to produce the numbers, prepared to vote against the government and rebel in the House of Commons to put pressure on her, aren't you?
Well, we'll have an idea of the numbers, I suppose, at 10 o'clock on Monday evening.
Some of your Brexiteer colleagues, of course, have decided to support the Chequers plan. Michael Gove was a leading figure in the Vote Leave campaign, and he says that amongst those of us who want to execute a proper Brexit and one that's the best deal for Britain, we now have an opportunity to get behind the Prime Minister. Why do you not believe him, a leading Brexiteer, when he says this is the best deal available?
Well, Michael has a theory that we should get legal Brexit on March the 29th next year, and then we should improve it and get a thorough Brexit thereafter. I think the second half of that simply isn't realistic. I don't think people are going to want to reopen an international treaty after March of next year or introduce new legislation. I think the country's ready to move on and discuss other issues, other important governmental issues, and they want Brexit done properly now. And if you look at the polling that's come out over the last few days, the country wants this done properly. It's not just a few hardline Eurosceptics. It's the nation at large that feels it voted to leave the European Union and it expects to leave the European Union. It doesn't want a lot of prime ministerial fudge.
Now, you said earlier that you fear that the Prime Minister remains a Remainer. Do you think, therefore, when she was giving speeches, the Lancaster House speech, the Mansion House speech, which you applauded, she didn't really mean it? Her heart wasn't in the kind of Brexit she was describing then?
Well, I am concerned about the Mansion House speech because the Prime Minister, in the interview with Mr. Marr this morning, made it clear that the European rulebook had been in the offing for some time. She wouldn't specify a date. So you do wonder what was really going on in Downing Street at that time. You
think she may have been being duplicitous?
I think that's a harsh word, and a harsher one than I would choose to use.
What word would you use?
Political.
Jacob Rees Mogg, thank you very much for talking to us this morning.